You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. Today's topics were a bit spur of the moment as I was catching up on some content. I came across an article I'll talk about later in this episode about vector databases that sparked my interest. And then one of the terms in the article is one that I've heard mentioned a lot this year, but still didn't know what it actually was: lexical search. I did some research and I'm going to start by sharing what I found out. So first up, what is lexical search? And then looking at that versus semantic search. I've heard lexical search come up quite a bit as a term this year, partially I think because I'm in the data and database spaces, but also just being tossed around in comparison with semantic search, lexical search, and other terms that are going on right now. But I still didn't know what it was after all this time, months of just it cropping up in conversation. As with many things, it's a fancy word for something that we do all the time, which is keyword search. I did a quick Google search and this is what it came up with. I'll link an article that I found that was really helpful in explaining the differences. And there were several articles listed, but the one that kind of popped into my interest and the one that I liked best was one using a coffee example, of course. But anyway, lexical search is keyword search, which means that it matches the exact word or phrase in a query. This, of course, then is going to miss some results when that exact word is not in the search results. Doing a keyword search, I want to look for something that is coffee, and you would look through all of your records or entities or objects or whatever you're searching, and it would look for that term, coffee. But it won't connect cafe or coffee shop. It would pick up the coffee in coffee shop. It wouldn't hit cafe or maybe library or some other things that might have similar vibes to a coffee shop and be common spaces to work in, for example, but it doesn't have that term coffee, so it wouldn't pick those up. It also, lexical search struggles with variations in language, such as synonyms or different word forms. Again, it's looking for that exact keyword or phrase match and not looking for anything outside of it. It ignores those other results. The alternative to lexical search is vector search or similarity search, or the general term, which is semantic search, which the AI industry has made really, really popular in the last couple of years. A semantic search converts the word and the entire documents potentially into numerical representations called vectors. We've talked a little bit about that on this podcast, and then lots of general AI tech industry stuff has mentioned this before. So you convert data, words, documents, paragraphs, sentences, etc., into a numerical representation called a vector. Then that captures the semantic essence of the content. It understands the relationships, the similarities between different concepts, things that are often used together or that are related concepts and ideas. So for instance, if you were looking for a cozy place to drink coffee, it would pull up the coffee shop that uses the meaning of a cozy coffee shop, including warm cafe, comfortable coffee lounge, maybe quiet library, things like that. And so it's going to give a more flexible and fuzzy searching approach to general search. Both lexical search and semantic search are going to have strengths and weaknesses. The article outlines some of these, and I just picked kind of the highlights here. For lexical search, its strength is going to be simplicity and speed. It's looking for an exact keyword match. You can index a lot of this stuff, search through records or entities, objects, etc. very, very quickly, search through data stores very quickly. The downside to lexical search is that it's going to have a limited understanding of meaning behind words, things that are contextual and that are used together or related concepts. So it's not going to have those fuzzy search capabilities. It will look for that exact term, and if that exact term doesn't exist in even very similar things, it's just not going to retrieve that result. However, a semantic search or a vector similarity search, its strength is that it excels in understanding the meaning and can find relevant concepts with varying terms. The downside to this is that it's very complex and very resource intensive. You have to create those vectors from data first off, and then you have to do a very comprehensive search. And as we've seen with AIs and LLMs and things this year, the last couple of years, you can sometimes get less predictable answers. It's going to vary on the algorithm and the optimizations and the data and all sorts of things. So it's not going to be quite as predictable as a lexical search might be. I really enjoyed looking at what lexical search is. Now, the article that term actually popped up in, that I had to go back and do the research to figure out what it was, is one called Vector Databases Are the Wrong Abstraction. This I thought was really interesting because we've seen a ton of content and a ton of interest in vector databases and vector capabilities this year. But there were a couple of things that popped up in this article that I found really interesting and things that hadn't really been pointed out to me too much yet this year. First off is, of course, vector databases store vectors, but there's not a whole lot of room for additional metadata. This is one of the things that makes searching them very, very fast. They store the actual vector representation and then a bit of metadata on the side, but there's not a whole lot of other things to clutter it up. However, this also requires separating the actual vector representation, the embedding of the data, from the data that it's actually based on. And this article points out what happens when the data changes or when you have model upgrades and changes. Like, for instance, Gemini or OpenAI or Meta releases a latest upgraded model. Then your embeddings get out of sync and your data's out of sync. And the scenario that the article puts forth is that the text data doesn't fit inside a vector database. Again, your records are very small. You have the vector representation and then a little bit of metadata. So you have some sort of like relational database to hold your blobs and long form text. And then you'll need a tool of some sort that's really, really fast with lexical search or keyword search. That's going to require an analytics tool for that. And then syncing amongst all these different tools becomes a real nightmare. Every update, delete, new record becomes a multi-hop series of steps. And then missing one is going to leave irrelevant data and, of course, increase your costs over time. There was one example that there were thousands of dollars a month for a record that got left out there and didn't get updated or deleted properly. This article is from Timescale, and so they're going to have a spin. They're going to advocate for using a new vectorizer called PGAI Vector with PostgreSQL to help with this problem. And of course, this is going to be their spin on it, and that's totally cool. But I just making that assimilation with the general database market is that there's lots of databases in this space of storing vectors alongside the data in the same system, in other words. I'm wondering if we will start to see, now that we've used vector databases over and over and over, and we've kind of seen their strengths and their weaknesses, we'll start seeing where the weak spots are and then combating those with tools and improvements in the general database market overall. Now, as with any technology, there will be lots of use cases where vector databases will really shine, and I don't think that's going to go away. However, as we use them more and more, we stretch and we push their boundaries and their limits and their edge cases. We'll figure out where they excel and then where they lack. I am really curious and excited to see where this goes for 2025. And I really enjoyed this article, kind of surfacing some things I hadn't really thought about and some edge cases that this industry is now starting to see. As we get close to the end of the year, I'm always thinking about increasing my intake of skills and knowledge. And this week's topic just popped up as I was scrolling through newsletter articles. I hope you can pull something from my musings as well as I learned something this week. Thanks for listening and happy coding.